Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly. Doom Eternal has been out for a good couple of weeks now. 22 days? Beard, what are you doing? I barely had time to sink my claws into it, and no, that's not a bear pun. My question was where to start with this series. And while many immediately go to the Doomslayer, as that's very fair since almost all the lore revolves around him, I thought, why not go with the enemy instead? Why not the con maker, the not angel that did nothing wrong, but just made the wrong person eternally angry? I don't mean these puns, I promise. Sorry. Something that was never really touched on within Doom's story over the past 27 or so years has been the existence of heaven. While hell has existed, and obviously so with the demons that pop up and go, "Rawr, Doom guy bad," we have never seen an angel at all. That's what makes Eternal so interesting. But the question exists, are these really angels? What motivates the con maker? Before we get started, I'd like to ask if you do enjoy this piece to not forget to hit those buttons here on YouTube. Any support you guys can kindly offer would be great. Thanks a ton. First off, things just kind of are in Doom. For the time being, certain pieces just exist within the universe. For instance, we're still not entirely sure the origins of hell, except for the fact that it does just exist. In the same, we're unsure of a certain segment of the Maker's history. So let's go through a bit of that. This is the semi-funny part, since we don't have much info on hell's origins, but we do about heaven's? Anyway, we're somewhat off track already, but what else is new? Most of our absolute information on the Makers comes from the story of the Makers here in-game. There are a few other pieces that we can get and figure from the story of the Sentinels and the Maker drone entries. So if you're interested in learning more about the Makers on your own, that's where I'm getting a lot of this information. You can find it over on the Doom Eternal wiki, as well as also just in-game, of course, if you decide to actually go for the Lore Master title. The Makers have been around, supposedly, longer than any other species we may know of in Doom's universe. But that's up in the air, considering we're unsure of the history of the demons. Though, that's a story for another day, I guess. Urdak itself goes further back than any recorded world Earth's government and the Union Aerospace Corporation have on record. I mean, not that Earth has gone too far out past Mars to our knowledge, but that's a thought for another day, too. I just said it twice in one paragraph, didn't I? Ugh. Urdak is the home of the Makers. The stage you interact with most of their technology also happens to be the one that you see the Con Maker in her full, non-hologrammed glory. There are a couple other instances of this throughout the campaign of Eternal, but these cases are rare. Urdak is where the angels, drones, and Khan all reside, given birth by something called the Father. And that is just how much we know about this entity. For some reason, the Father gave the Makers life, and allowed them to manage the realm as they saw fit. Largely, the Makers seem to be mechanical constructs, especially with the outside shell they all seem to have, though I feel getting into their physical makeup is a story. Oh, forget it. You know what I'm gonna say. There are a few places around Urdak that seem to look similar to a bunch of tree branches that twine together, almost like an information highway, in a way. I find this interesting as we see it with the destroyed divinity machine, the device that granted the Slayer his powers, so it seems to be constant among Maker construction. I don't know what relevance this holds other than thinking further on the idea of the Makers being a technological construct of some type, following a set of programming rules more than anything else, I guess. In other words, they seem to be a computerized species to a degree with a hive mind. That's all I want to stress to give more background on what I perceive the Makers to be. And this hive mind is also kind of loose, I should mention that a little bit. Each drone, each angel, the Khan herself, all have individual thoughts, but they all bend to the will of the Khan. This also falls in line with what we know of the Father, the very limited amount that we do know. I'll read over the passage from the entry entitled Urdak to give you a better idea. Despite their seeming godliness, the Makers have a past. At some point in their ageless history, there is a mention of the Father, a logical alien entity that endowed the Makers with their vast knowledge and technical ability. Analysis of Maykr artifacts and scripture indicate that the Father may have been a singular being that split to form the Maykr race, or instead transferred his incalculable power into the vast structure known as Urdak, which then birthed the Maykrs in perpetuity. Later on in the entry, there are no records of how the Father came to the Maykrs, when it was first discovered, or if it had any physical form before the Maykrs. The first mention of the Father is in regard to a building named the Luminarium. It was a temple of sorts where the Maykrs would go to seek answers. The essence of the Father was stolen by one of their own, a Maykr referred to as the Seraphim. Who the Seraphim is, or what he did with the Father's consciousness, is unknown. Wanted to read some of this as I find it important to read word for word at points. There is some later mention of a Seraphim by the name of Samur that left or was banished. We're unsure. And he seems to have been the one that took the Father, whatever it may have been. Fast forward to a moment within the Urdak mission.
Now, insert Vega to activate the portal.
System acquired. Setting a course for the Earth dimension now.
I can see now. Am I the Father agreed?
Can I just pass on this for now? Because this is a theory in and of itself, okay? What's important to know about the Father as a being is it gave the Maykrs the ability to be as they are now. What is unknown is how many Maykrs we see within the background history of the Sentinels, especially in the Story of the Sentinels section of our entries in history. What we do know is the Maykrs are worried about something that happens every 10,000 years or so to Maykrs: transfiguration. When this process occurs, a new Khan is born of the old one, placing their essence into another Khan, carrying on the will of the Maykrs. Drones and angels also seem to be put down, but then reborn in service of the new Khan. With the disappearance of the Father, this causes Urdak to be without its greatest life-giver, and the main piece of how the Maykrs are able to continue as a people. This is the setup for what leads the Khan to do what she does. It's not necessarily bad, it's most definitely a gray area, though that gray area is still practical genocide. Oh, well, thanks YouTube. The first time any of us are told about the Maykrs is in the second part of Sentinel history. The Maykrs were important to Sentinel society, or as we come to call them, the Argenta. Argent D'Nur was the realm of the Sentinels, and we found its fate at the end of Doom 2016 with the final mission, Argent D'Nur itself. Though this is only a portion of the planet and a major piece of the battle that eventually pulled the whole world into hell, or just that portion. The whole realm into hell thing needs its own explanation all on its own. So anyway, let's just move on from that topic. We tended to call them by their full titles, however, the Night Sentinels. These Night Sentinels have a starting point all of their own, so we won't go far into that today. What I do want to point out is the Maykrs had connected with the Argentans, and in so doing, they struck a few different bargains. I'll read a passage from the entries from the history of the Sentinels entitled Ligra Soltagenta, or Book of Kings, in Argentan. This is entry 2. In the time of grief, when King Etrix took the throne, a blessing came to the people of Argenta. White porcelain beings from a world beyond our own brought a gift to D'Nur. Observers to our great deeds, admirers of our convictions, they sought to make bond with our swords and bring lasting order to our world. These were beings unlike any we had seen before. Sword and shield held no weight against them, for the ethereal flesh of these luminous beings seemed unbounded by mortality. Able to move through time and space, they held sway over all dominions of the known and unknown dimensions. Through their ways we grew stronger, our society bolstered by their infinite wisdom and all-knowing power, assuring our people safety for all time, in this world and the next. Where we sharpened the blade and mastered our magic, they bolstered the soul and spirit. Death would no longer be the end of our people. The ones we call the Maykrs, our new allies in this brutal world, have given us the society in death we fought so hard to achieve in life. We would find eternal peace, and our minds would rest easy with the knowledge that those we fought alongside in battle would join us in the lands beyond the mortal plane. The strength of our ways, the purity of our essence, would by Maykr law grant us passage to the great city in the clouds. There our women and children, warriors and kin alike, would welcome us. We adopted the holy doctrines of the Maykrs, gifted in exchange with the chance to earn eternal rest for our immortal souls in blessed Urdak. The covenant we held, now under the embrace of our new gods, fostered a peace we had never known, for they were unlike the first ones, whose presence offered no paradise from fear and the uncertainty of existence in a harsh and unforgiving world. The Maker's embrace was warm and guided us into an era of spiritual prosperity. Bit of extra info here. The first ones listed are the elemental wraiths, which were the start of Argent Dinur. We are also unsure how long this king was in power for, or how long the previous one was as well. We're unsure how many came before any of the kings, or how long it took for a written language or any kind of recording to happen for the Argentans. We are unsure of a lot of things about basic knowledge of the civilization of Argent Dinur. And that is okay. Yeah, you heard me. It's fine. Though it does generally set up and make me wonder a few things right off the bat about the interactions with the Maykrs and Argentans. How long had the Maykrs been around? Did the Maykrs already know about hell? How many other societies did the Maykrs come in contact with? I mean, we have some general idea, which the Urdak entry claims the Maykrs had been seen in other systems around the Milky Way galaxy, which calls to question the reach of the Maykrs. The people of Argent Dinur were not special in that regard, and offering the knowledge and secrets of the Maykrs to other species seems to be one of their inherent goals. So much so, they even did so with hell, which suggests they had no knowledge of hell prior to the Slayer arriving on Argent Dinur. It should be noted, however, that the structures of the Argentans had allowed the Maykrs to build the structures that we see in Necrovol, and without Sentinel engineering and influence, that all may not have been possible. At least, we think so. Of all the species that the Maykrs have had come in contact with prior to having found hell and discovering Argent energy, the Sentinels seem to be the most key to their needs in, well, almost every way possible. There's a lot more to cover about how the Khan and the demons work together, and I feel that too needs to be set to the side. Just know that there is a lot of unknown dealings on that table, but that the Argenta were necessary for labor of Necrovol and the other structures in hell that carry Argent energy up to Urdak and elsewhere, as no Maykr could go to hell, save perhaps the Khan herself. But that may have been a temporary peace to allow for coming to accord with the demon lords of hell. It's a lot to unpack in a few sentences. Sorry about that. Okay, this is where it all falls together. If you're lost, here's your summation as best as I can get it for you. The realm of Urdak was formed by a being called the Father. We're unsure which existed before, the Maykrs or the Father itself. Regardless, the Father, a being of logic, seemingly a computer of some kind or similar to it, allowed for the Maykrs to be, and allowed for their lifetimes to go on for around 10,000 years or so. The Khans were at the head of this society, and they controlled the drones and angels and seraphims, all manner of Maykr that existed in Urdak. Their goal? To pass on the knowledge that they had to other species underneath them. Though we're still not necessarily sure what that knowledge is outside of the existence of eternal life, in a way. Not really. Linked to all realms in time and space, this was possible, and so they chose the people of Argent Dinur at some point to help them grow as a society, completely destroying the Prime Directive. That was a Star Trek joke, don't mind me. With the loss of the father, the Maykrs can no longer revive themselves through the singularity, as it's called, and so transfiguration is almost assuredly a death sentence for the Maykrs this time around. They can no longer revive through this process. This leads them to look for a way to save their species, and whether they expected to find it or not, the Argentans discovered that means. This energy is what is largely the main focus now for a depleted Earth's resources, along with what the Maykrs in Argenta use to survive and flourish: Argent energy. This leads the Maykrs to focus on a means to create this energy, making a pact with Hell and using the Argenta to full effect for labor, for worship, and so on. All the while, the Maykrs spread their word from world to world, informing the populace that they find of heaven and hell, of finding those that will serve them, and those who are just going to be fodder for the process of Argent energy, those who will also bolster the armies of hell. For that is the pact that the Khan Maykr has made, our lives for the lives of her people, all the while allowing hell to be made more powerful with time, all from our husks. Well, at least there's plenty for us to rip and tear, I suppose. Effectively, the Khan did nothing wrong for the sake of her people, but the question is how many lives are worth the lives of another? How far is the needs of the many and needs of the few able to be stretched for beings that can't die and that offer up immense knowledge? How far are other species willing to go? All of these questions are for you to decide and answer for. At the end of the day, any threat to humanity is just another target for the Slayer. But that also is... Nope, I'm not going to finish that phrase. I've already said it I don't know how many times in this video. Alright, I have to cut things here. I know there's a lot of terms and ideas that are here that I haven't really been able to dig into very heavily. I needed to start somewhere. I need to start peeling back this information like an onion, or maybe like a Baron of Hell's obsidian shell. I hope to be back with you guys as quickly as I can be. If you have any questions about the things I covered here, then please let me know. Again, I'm doing my best not to overload you too much, but I know this is a lot if you haven't played the games especially. But I do want to correct that as well with another series entirely. Anyway, a lot of work to do. As an aside, I'm sorry for my absence. I will be better about this. I have to be better about this. I'll stop putting so much pressure on myself and just start doing. So again, I'll see you all as soon as I can. I know you've told me you're all patient with me, but I'm not patient with myself. I have my own goals to consider. Alright, mushy stuff over. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, then don't forget those buttons I asked about earlier on. I'd appreciate it if you could, if you enjoyed this or didn't. If you'd like to be part of future discussions, then you know the button to press as well, along with that big dumb bell for whatever reason. Thanks again, YouTube. But regardless what you choose to do today, thanks for sticking with me the whole way through. To all of you, no matter when or where you are, I'll see you next space time to rip and tear. Take care.